Good evening and welcome to Boston Media Theory. I'm Marcus Breen, and this is a show where we talk to people who live and work in Boston, who have a range of interests and concerns around communication and media, which is of course a huge area and something that we can't ever hope to fully cover, given that communication is so basic to our human interests and needs. So here we look at people who, and talk to people who are engaged in activism, research, teaching, production, creativity, poets and the like. And so tonight and today I'm delighted to welcome Jeannie Connerney.
Connerney. Yes.
Who's going to talk with me about Ireland and Palestine. Now, Jeannie's just recently returned from Ireland, half her luck, and so we'll hear about her experiences not only as a visitor to Ireland in this summer of 2025, but also what the current state of affairs seems to be in relation to the support campaign by Ireland and across Ireland of the Palestinian people. I was going to start this show with something that came into the X account that I have this morning, and that was a group of Palestinian mothers and Irish women and mothers singing together about their hopes and aspirations for peace. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it. It may be because powers greater than either Jeannie or myself or NewTV or even, well, other powers took over perhaps that site and decided not to make it available any longer. I don't know, but I couldn't find it. But it was a beautiful song to experience this morning on social media platforms. And in terms of our theme for this show, Palestine and its relationship with Ireland, one of the important points that we can talk about is the relationship between media and social media especially, and the struggle against what Israel is doing to Palestine and the Palestinian people, and the importance of that right across the world in changing the narrative, if you like, and opposing the things that are going on in Palestine. So it's mid-2025, and frankly Gaza is still headlining the news, and frankly it's an Israeli government-made disaster. And for Palestine, for Palestinians and for Palestine, it's a daily experience of mass killings through bombings, starvation, shootings, imprisonment, and really it's a dismal story. It's hard to, in fact, be optimistic in this climate. What brings us to Ireland, and why we should talk about Ireland when we talk about Palestine, and in some ways a slightly pessimistic take on the situation for the Palestinian people in Gaza and the West Bank, is of course that Ireland stands out as a country that has a remarkable history of support for the struggle by the Palestinian people. One recent activity that people may not be aware of and that viewers may be interested to learn is that in 2024 the ambassador of Israel left Ireland, or was recalled, and has not, as I understand it, gone back to Ireland. And that was partly for a number of reasons, but certainly the Israeli presence was not welcomed in Ireland. So Jeannie, you know a lot about this, and I don't want to go on too much more with an introduction, but just given that you've been recently in Ireland, what's the sense in your observations and your experience of how this nexus, this relationship between Ireland and Palestine is working out on a day-to-day basis?
Well, thank you for having me. I returned from Ireland at the end of July, and there's quite a bit going on there. There has been quite a bit going on. It's some of it I think is coming to fruition now. While I was there in Dublin, there was a protest and a march to the Dáil, which is the Irish Senate, and that march had about over 10,000 people attending. It was huge. It was people from all over Ireland, very peaceful, marching, and there were speakers afterwards. There were several demands being made by the people. One of these was passing the Occupied Territories Bill. That's a bill which would prevent Ireland from doing business with the occupied territories that Israel has occupied. And that actually passed in 2018, but it has yet to be enacted. Unfortunately, right now, it only contains goods and not services. So one of the demands was that services be added to this bill. As I understand it, the Doyle is now on summer leave until September, and it will be taken up and voted in September. Another demand was that any planes containing weapons bound for Israel not fly through Irish airspace or land at Shannon Airport. And another demand was that the IHRA definition, which was adopted by Ireland strangely, which would make anti-Semitic a lot of the statements uttered by Irish politicians themselves, including Micheál Martin, who's the Taoiseach, who's the Prime Minister, and others, be taken off the table. In addition, the Irish Central Bank issues bonds for Israel, and that is a huge problem for most of the people in Ireland. So I think it was a very successful march. That was one of the things that happened. Less than a week later, I was in Belfast in the north of Ireland, and there was another protest against starvation, at which there were probably at least 600 people banging pots. And Ireland, as we may know, experienced their own starvation from 1845 to 1852. There's a debate in academic circles about whether this is genocide. A lot of people say, of course it was genocide. The potato crop failed in Ireland, as we probably know. It failed in other parts of Europe as well. However, they didn't experience starvation. The British took a lot of the crops, besides potatoes, that were still being grown. There were plantation farms. They had to give a certain amount of food to the landlords in order to keep the land, and a lot of these were exported. A lot of the landlords did not stop exporting for profit. British leaders such as Trevelyan at the time believed in laissez-faire economics. They wanted to make a profit. And so over 1 million people starved in Ireland during those years, and another 1 million emigrated. And so Ireland has a lot of empathy and understanding for the starvation that's now going on in Gaza.
Absolutely, and it's almost a seamless connection, if you like, sadly held together by the English, the British.
Yes.
A sad sense of commonality, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, Britain, as we know, took over control of the land of Palestine during World War I, after World War I, from the Ottoman Empire. And at that time, the Balfour Declaration, with which a lot of people are probably familiar, was signed, which guaranteed the land to Zionists. There's a quote from a very telling quote from a governor of Jerusalem at the time, and he said, "By creating Israel here, we are creating a loyal little Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism."
Wow.
And Ulster, as we may or may not know, is the northernmost part of Ireland, where there were a lot of plantations, where there were a lot of settlers, which was basically the crux of the settler colonialism. And it was partitioned, which is a whole nother subject.
It is a whole nother subject, but it's a sad state of affairs in the sense in which the reproduction of such injustice has gone on for such a long time.
Yeah. In 1916, of course, was the Irish Revolution, and after fighting that, there was an agreement made that the 6 counties in the north remain part of the UK, with the 26 counties in the south gaining independence. And in those 6 counties in the north, which, by the way, were gerrymandered to ensure a Protestant majority, the Irish Catholic minority still experienced apartheid and discrimination in terms of housing, in terms of jobs. And it was in the 60s that the Troubles began, that they started demanding their civil rights. Violence erupted in many ways, Bloody Sunday, which we may have heard of. The British Army was there to supposedly keep the peace, although it soon became very evident that they were not neutral in this situation. And in any case, on Bloody Sunday, it was a peaceful march. 26 people were shot. 13 died that day. Another one died the next day. None of the people who were shot were armed. Many were shot in the back, and several were shot trying to help other people who had been shot. Later, the soldiers were exonerated of any wrongdoing, and the Queen decorated them. So after that, the IRA membership became very large. A lot of people joined the IRA. That was the biggest recruiting event, really, they ever had. And they began a bombing campaign. Now, I want to bring up here that there was a Protestant paramilitary organization called the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force. And this is a case of who's controlling the narrative, because a lot of people have heard of the IRA as a terrorist organization. Not many people, especially in the United States or other countries, have heard of the UVF. During the Troubles, about 3,500 people died. The UVF actually killed more civilians than the IRA, which is probably not what a lot of people realize. But in any case, it was really tragic. Both sides lost a lot of innocent people. It was an ongoing tit-for-tat conflict in a lot of ways. And seeing a lot of the murals, a lot of the graves, it's really a tragic situation. A lot of people who were not involved in politics just died because of the violence. And it's really tragic that it had to come to that.
Absolutely. And it's also a continuing tragedy in the sense in which, as I said a little earlier, the continuation of the British and the English especially in supporting what you referred to as settler colonial activity in and around Palestine and through Palestine, and the inaction of the US government as well in this relation. I also wanted to ask, backing up a little, while on one hand we have this sort of broad historical continuation of how imperial countries have acted, England in Ireland, England in Palestine, and then England and the US and the EU in Palestine and so on. Largely, that's probably what governments do. And what I heard you saying before is that in your visit to Ireland, there's an enormous sense in which the people are protesting. Is there a distinction that can be made here about the actions of Irish people who've experienced their own crisis and their own suffering through imperialism and through settler colonialism, and who have a voice, but that voice differs to their government?
I think to some extent. I think that the people in general would like their government to do more. The government does say a lot in support of Palestine. Their actions are a little slower, though. And they're fighting politics just like any other government. There are a lot of United States companies in Ireland providing jobs, so I'm sure they're concerned about the economy. And, you know, I believe that obviously their morality should take precedence. And I think that's part of the fear of doing things, because then some of the companies might pull out, et cetera. They are somewhat of a leader in Europe. They, as you said, were the last country to recognize a Palestinian state. And I mean, they were
first.
the first country to recognize the Palestinian state. They were the last country to open an Israeli embassy. They joined the South African case in December of 2024, I'm sorry. And that caused Israel to close their embassy in Dublin. In 2025, they officially recognized the Palestinian state, which they withdrew their ambassador. And it's very interesting because there's an Israeli writer who came up with a term, Palestinian, that these Irish people are Palestinians. And the Irish, of course, adopted it and liked the term. There's T-shirts that says "Proud Palestinian." And Irish culture, of course, I think there's a lot of empathy, there's a lot of understanding what the Irish people went through. It would be interesting to see what the statistics are on whether there is a divide between people of, I will say, nationalists or loyalists in the North as to whether they support Palestine. Now, one of the things I noticed walking down the Falls Road, which is the Catholic road, is there are many pro-Palestinian murals. There are many murals where there's solidarity with Palestine, solidarity with POWs, one struggle, Ireland and Palestine, etc. I also walked down the Shankill Road, which is the Protestant road. They're parallel, and that's where a lot of the troubles were. And I only saw one mural in support of Israel. I was told by somebody that there used to be more, but a lot of them have disappeared as the conflict goes on. And I think that it's becoming less popular to support Israel, given what is happening for anyone.
Yeah. You'd have to have a pretty serious problem to support Israel, frankly, given what we see on social media and given what we hear and read on a day-to-day basis. But I recognise that that's a somewhat controversial opinion, because from the perspective of Zionism, there should be no question that Jewish people deserve a homeland. The problem is that the cost of having a homeland is at the great disservice to the people who lived there before. So let's move on then to the question of your own engagement with this. Here we are in Boston, a somewhat Irish-inflected city, and you've made this connection between Ireland and Palestine in a sort of activist sense. How does that work? And how, is it unique to Boston, for example, this connection, or is it just perhaps a bit of an illusion? I don't know, given how inactive our governments are in the United States generally in supporting the Palestinians.
I don't think it's unique to Boston. What I do think, however, is that a lot of the Irish diaspora, especially in previous generations, was very interested in fitting in to the new culture. And I think that a lot of Irish Americans now, or people of Irish heritage, have forgotten the history of Ireland and the 800 years of occupation and what Britain did to them. And they're proud Americans. The United States gave them opportunity, as did places like Australia and Canada and other British colonies. And there are a lot of very conservative Irish Americans as well. I think that it's for people who have recently come to the United States or other countries, it's more in the zeitgeist. It's more popular. That said, there's an opportunity probably to help people make that connection, people who are not so familiar with Irish history as the generations go on.
Right, and what kind of opposition or what kind of pushback, if any, have you observed or experienced in promoting an understanding of this relationship between Irish support for Palestine and Ireland?
Yeah, we've contacted, there's an Irish newspaper, I believe, in Dorchester, which we wanted to give a few announcements there of a picnic we were having, and they wouldn't run it. You know, there's a lot of, we don't want to get involved. But that's the case, I think, with a lot of organizations. That's the case, I will go off on a tangent here and say, with the Archdiocese of Boston as well. I also belong to a group called Pax Christi, which is a Catholic peace organization. And we have been trying to get Archbishop Henning, we had been trying to get him to call for a ceasefire. He would not call for a ceasefire. We had a rally in front of the Holy Cross Cathedral, and he basically stopped responding to our calls and our emails, which is unfortunate. And I will note that on the website of the Archdiocese, Archbishop O'Malley, who preceded Henning, had put up a statement shortly after October 7th in solidarity with the Jewish people of Boston and the local community, offering sympathy for what happened on October 7th. Now, almost 2 years later, despite our request, there has been no statement of sympathy offered for Palestinian people who may live in the area. And I had made it clear that it certainly seems like the Archdiocese values Jewish or Israeli lives far more than Palestinian lives. And of course, this is all despite both Pope Francis and Pope Leo being very outspoken about what is happening in Palestine. So it's the American bishops that are not, and that's, I'm sorry I've gone off on a tangent, but it's very disappointing for a lot of people, a lot of Catholics in the Boston area and everywhere in the United States.
Well, it's also absolutely disappointing, and it's also relevant in the sense in which so much of what we're talking about, but fundamentally the crisis of a Palestinian state and the murder of so many Palestinians by Israel is foundationally a religious question. And it's this sort of endless kind of underpinnings of theology from all different kinds of denominational perspectives that feed into a kind of ideology that seems to be a really problematic aspect of the whole thing, whether you're talking about Palestine, Israel, whether you're talking about activism within the Catholic Church, whether you're talking about, as you sort of mentioned before, my people, Northern Irish Protestants, and I understand that tradition a little bit, in fact probably too much. I mean, much of it is very much this sort of question of when we open the curtain, as it were, it's not just the man it's not just the man behind the curtain, it's a whole theology, and an ideology connected to that, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, I don't think, though, these conflicts are based so much on religion.
Okay.
I don't think that in any of these conflicts people are really arguing theology. I think it has to do with power and money and dominance. And people who feel entitled to have something because of European hegemony or because of a certain belief that they deserve it. And I tend to think that in a lot of cases theology acts in the service of political dominance. And I would add also, I took a fantastic class at Harvard last semester, Harvard Divinity School, called Religious Nationalisms. Nationalism in itself is a type of religion. It shares a lot with religion. It shares beliefs and practices and ideologies, right? So it's sometimes hard to draw the line between religion and nationalism. And the two are very intertwined in a culture often. And if it was just a matter of theology, people could have intellectual arguments, right, and debate the Trinity or any other theological tenet. But I think it has more to do with that, especially as there is a lot of money being made through this war for military companies in the United States, as we know, and around the world. for a lot of technology companies who are selling tech to Israel, which are used in this genocide and in Israeli prisons, etc. And it has to do with capitalism, it has to do with Orientalism, thinking that they're the other, they're not as advanced as Europeans. And of course, world dominance and wanting to have presence in the Middle East, basically for profit and dominance.
Right. And that's the US position, seems insuperable, or whatever the word is. It just cannot move it on that, in terms of nothing speaks like money. Nothing
Exactly.
speaks like super profits,
Right.
because that's what these companies are making. We're getting towards the end of this. Any thoughts or any observations on the impact of your activism? What might have happened, or what you've seen as a result of your campaign in support of Palestine through the lens of the Irish struggle?
Well, I think it's another way to see this. I'm a member of several activist groups, and I think that anything that gets the conversation going, that gets the word out there, that lets people know what's actually happening, that can spur people to identify with Palestinians, that Palestinians have rights to land, to life, to self-determination, to everything else that every other human being in the world has a right to. And also just realizing some of the history, some of the common history, especially between Ireland and Palestine, that it was started by England. In part, by the way, because they did not want a lot of Jews coming to England after World War II. And it was a way to ensure that they had a place to go so that they couldn't come to England. And
Those damn English.
yeah, well,
Sorry, all due respect to the English folk, but really, you've got a lot of work to do.
English. I think, though, if you could find something that people identify with, right, as in, and I know we don't have any time, but there are also Christians in Palestine, a minority of Christians. There's a way that people might say, oh, I didn't know that. I thought they were all Muslims. We recently had Father Bashar Fawadleh from the West Bank visit my parish and speak about that. And just trying to draw the connection, it's not the other. We're not talking about the other here. We're talking about all of us as the human race, as human beings. And we all have the same rights.
Okay, well, what a beautiful but also sad note on which to end, keeping in mind that we do indeed, as human beings, should all share the same rights, and certainly our aspiration should begin and probably end with the opportunity just to live in peace, certainly to survive and not to be demonised and not to be othered. So I want to say thank you very much, Jeannie, for being here, for sharing your insights and your understandings of this remarkable and challenging time, the importance of Ireland to the struggle of the Palestinian people, and of your own work. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Thanks. Well, that's it from me and from Boston Media Theory. Until next time, keep on mediaing. Bye.
In times of struggle, conflict, poverty, good finds a way. Good is happening, even now. Good never stops, and neither does Children International. With support from caring friends, we help provide children and families with the critical essentials they need. Together, we can help end poverty. To learn more, go to children.org